Nigeria's plan to close its metering gap has sparked fresh tensions in the power sector following a directive by the Minister of Power that prepaid meters under a World Bank-backed program must be installed free of charge. Electricity distribution companies have pushed back, warning that the policy raises serious questions around cost recovery, regulation, and sector sustainability. And that's aside from the current experience with the national grid collapse twice in 4 days. Joining us now to delve into the conversation, we have the MD and CEO of New Hampshire Capital Limited in person of Odion Omonfoman. Good morning and thank you for your time this morning.
Morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can, loud and clear. And to kick off with the situation and the latest developments within the sector before we get to the meters, grid collapse. It's a new year, same issues, challenges. Is that what we're going to see?
Well, unfortunately, the way the Nigerian national grid is constructed, I don't think we can run away from the issues of grid collapse or grid disturbance, as it's now called these days. Reason being that a number of issues can affect the grid and trip it off. For instance, things not even related to the power sector. A gas pipeline can be vandalized, or a 330 transmission tower can be vandalized, and it will bring down the grid. The grid, unfortunately, has no such redundancy such that you can reroute the power automatically if one section of the grid fails. So if one section of the grid fails for whatever reason, it affects everything. So I think what the emphasis should now be is, even if we have these grid disturbances, events of grid disturbances or collapses, how quickly can we restore the grid back? That should be the metric now, not counting the number of times the national grid has either collapsed partially, fully, or is disturbed. We can't unfortunately control it. The other thing is that I think we need to take our national grid as a critical national infrastructure and get our security forces to start to protect it. So the events of vandalism, we can at least reduce that, while the operational issues sometimes that can bring down the grid, the regulators and the market operators can also attend to that.
All right, so the focus should shift from how often to how quickly can it be restored, and hopefully we are seeing just that. What's your assessment of how quickly it's being restored, right, so far?
Well, it's collapsed. Well, I hate to use the word collapse. We've had downtimes. I think this consistently for the last 3 or 4 times now, or rather maybe 3 times. Right, that tells me that there's a big problem somewhere. So when it's restored, it's brought down back again. It's down again. So it's possible that there's a line issue somewhere that is not making the grid stable or bringing it down. So I guess TCN or the TSP would have to go and literally look for where the fault is coming from to restore the line. But I'm sure they're doing everything possible to make sure that the grid becomes up and running again and stable.
All right. Now let's come to the topic at hand, which is the free metering that was recently announced by the Minister of Power. There are many of us that see this as not necessarily new, right? We've heard this before. It's not the first time it's been announced that customers will get free prepaid meters. So what is different this time? Well,
what is different this time? I don't think there's anything really different this time. Free metering, or the era of mass meter rollouts, didn't start under the present administration. It's been on since the administration of Olusegun Obasanjo, right? I think what the minister has said has been taken out of context, and it's been reframed in a manner that he suggested that installers or meter installation is free. And I think he was looking at it from the perspective of the customer not paying an additional cost for meter installation. You find out that, first of all, the meters are not free. Customers are paying for it. We are all paying for it because it's already in the tariff, right? These assets are supposed to be provided by the utility to customers at no cost. It's only because the utilities are technically bankrupt that we've had to go out to pay for meters ourselves. In addition, this is a World Bank loan, part of the DisRep program, a loan to the federal government, which is then a further loan to the utilities, the DisCos, right? So eventually we all pay for this through our tariffs. What it just means is that nobody will have to bring money from their pockets to pay anybody for the meter to be installed. Now, talking about the installation, the cost of installation is already embedded in the loan itself. It was a loan that required a tendering process, and in the tender, you tendered for the meter cost and the cost of installation. So the installation cost is already inside the loan itself. So customers are expected not to pay a dime to anybody to allow the meters to be installed. But however, here's my opinion on this. I think meter installers are have not been treated fairly in this whole scheme of things. I think they're really the backbone of this metering rollout, regardless of how anybody wants to look at it. The meter installers, the guy who takes the meters from wherever the warehouses and puts it in the customer's premise. For me, that's the guy who was shortchanged in all of this, because the question is, how much is he paid? His remuneration is so poor, safety-wise, all that. So people bid for meters, but when it comes to installation, the amount bidded for to install one meter is so poor, you literally scratch your head. How will this be achieved? So it's important that the minister looks at the compensation mechanism for meter installers. You're not going to install $500 million worth of meters and pay meter installers peanuts. The program will fail. So it's important that as they design more of these mass metering schemes, the remuneration of meter installers, the welfare should be looked at critically. In fact, maybe they should be looked at side by side the cost of the meters. Because at the end of the day, the meter installer is as important as the meter itself. Because if you don't have trained meter installers who are well remunerated, you're going to have meters that are installed and at some point they'll fail.
Interesting. So there's a remuneration issue, and one would assume that's why we see people having to pay for installation, even separately from having to pay for the meter. You have cited that the cost of the meter it is embedded in the tariffs. But I speak with developers. I heard one recently, and he said that sometimes he has to pay $180 for single phase and $300 for 3 phases. So I mean, there's a discrepancy between what should be right and what is actually happening on the streets, where people have to pay not just for meter but for installation. So I mean, aside from these announcements being made, is there some sort of guideline or regulation that's consumers can fall back to when they experience anything otherwise than what is the ideal or what is announced?
Well, there are 3 metering schemes currently running pari passu. First is the meter asset provider scheme. In that scheme, customers pretty much pay for the meters that will be installed at their premises. But guess what? It's a loan to the utility. So eventually that money is supposed to be paid back to the customer via energy credits, rebates in their energy vending. So that's the MAP scheme, where there's a regulation behind that. The second scheme is what you call the meter acquisition fund scheme, where we all, in our tariff, we pay $1.82 per kilowatt hour. Every single electricity customer in this country pays that. And that is pooled into a fund where the federal government then allocates meters, which is now called free metering. It's really not free. We all paid for it. And so that's the MAP scheme is now being used to close out Band A and Band B customers, which, to my mind, I don't think it's fair. You can have people who are on estimated bills, the guys who are on Band D, Band E, who have not been metered, but yet they are still paying $1.82 per kilowatt hour on estimated basis, so that Band A and Band B customers can get free meters. I don't think that's fair. And then you have the disrupt metering program. The disrupt metering program is funded by the World Bank. That is a loan through the federal government to the utilities to provide meters. And that is also supposedly free to customers. In other words, you don't pay. So the only scheme that customers pay for meters is under the MAP scheme. And that is so to make sure that in the event that the free meters don't get to you, you're also not stuck. You can access your meter on your own, and then the DisCos will reimburse you back, just the same way the DisCos will pay the federal government and the World Bank for the free meters that it's currently rolling out in the district. There's also the PMI, the Presidential Metering Initiative, that coordinates all of this. And I know there's one more metering scheme that will come out before the end of this year to address the metering gap as well. So please, customers only pay under the MAP scheme. And that is to make sure that customers that want their meter like yesterday, they can pay and get their meters. And the prices are regulated there.
I'm just trying to understand how you know which scheme you fall under at the end of the day with, so many, schemes that play here.
Well, it's simple. If you want to pay for meters, you can go approach a DisCos, and if they let you pay, you pay. Because I know some DisCos are kind of stopping customers from accessing the MAP scheme, which I also don't think is fair, because if you're not under the MAP scheme, you are sure when you get your meter, 10 days after you pay. But for the free meters, it all depends on the benevolence of the utility to deliver the meters to you. So you can approach your DisCos, and you know the metering scheme that you should take.
Fair enough. And with this announcement, we're seeing a pushback from the DisCos. Let us into that and why they are averse to this announcement that the minister made.
Like I said, I'm not sure the pushback is coming from the DisCos. I think it might be coming from uninformed members, employees of the DisCos who do not really understand how the program has been designed. Like I said, the minister again has made. I'm not speaking for him, but I think his words have been reframed into something that looks like meter installation is free in the sense to customers. Very straightforward. The cost of the meter installation is already part of the loan. So therefore, no need for customers to pay a separate installation fee. Now, if the utilities believe that the cost of meter installation is not enough or is not significant or is not well captured under the district program, then they have the right to go back to the minister or the PMI team and say, look, we need to be very clear what the cost of installation is. But to say customers should pay for meter installation under the district program is not, it shouldn't even be thought about or considered because it's a loan. The loan covers the cost of the meter assets, the cost of the meter materials, and then the cost of installing the meters at the customer premises. And all that cost is meant to be borne by the utility through the World Bank loan.
Thank you so much for that clarification. Of course, we're supposed to have the Chief Technical Advisor to the Minister on this conversation joining you today, but he apparently had to attend to matters in Gombe State, which apparently is the source of the major trippings that we're seeing now with the national grid. But I'll pose this final question to you, and there are those who are asking, with the decentralization, right, of the whole electricity sector, more power given to the states in that regard, whose place is it to announce or manage this metering schemes?
That's a fantastic question, and it's something that I've been a key part of this whole decentralization conversation. States that have regulated markets should, in my view, be the parties to make these announcements, or at least supervise or superintend how these processes play out. Because at the end of the day, distribution matters fall squarely within states' markets. However, the funding is a funding that is coming from the World Bank to the federal government. So you can also say the federal government would have a say how the funds are distributed or dispersed or utilized. So I think there should be some firm handshake. At the end of the day, the regulation of that distribution state market is under the state's regulatory concern. The funding comes from the federal government. There has to be some synergy to make sure that the utilization of the funds, there's proper oversight in how these funds are utilized and accountability that these meters that were deployed within a state electricity market, the regulator can account for the meters deployed in that market. So I would say it's a collaborative effort, but one must recognize that while funding comes from the federal government and overall program management is within the federal government's powers, the regulation of that asset into the electricity regulated asset base of DisCos is now the function of State Electricity Regulatory Commission. So as such, there should be that collaboration and synergy amongst both the federal and state actors.
Collaboration, synergy, those are the key underlining words there. But thank you so much for your thoughts, clarifications, and perspective on the topic, on the conversation today. Odion Omonfoman, MD CEO of New Hampshire Capital Limited.
Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. And next up on Business Edge, we are staying within the sector, right? Whatever the source of power, it's important that you have the supply. Solar is now coming into the conversation. Solar power has become cheaper, apparently. I'm quoting now. Solar power has become cheaper than electricity from Nigeria's national grid for the first time. That's a story being widely circulated in the media space over the last couple of days. How true is it? And what could this mean for the existing traditional power infrastructure, which has continued to falter? We have joining us Dr. Patrick Agese. He is the founder, CEO of PAM Africa. We also have Ayomide Agbola, the country manager of Wester Solar. Good morning, Ayomide. I believe you're in with us now. Dr. Patrick will join us shortly. And thank you for your time this morning. Now, based off of the report, the math was done quoting electricity prices at 220 naira to 270 naira per kilowatt hours versus solar and wind installation, which generates power at about, I believe, 85 naira to 140 naira per kilowatt hours. Now, is this formula and the numbers here, are they accurate?
Hi, Jonah. Thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me very clearly.
Yes, loud and clear.
So, first of all, this didn't just happen. Solar has been cheaper than grid electricity for a very long, pretty much since we started selling solar to customers. That was the selling point anyway, that solar electricity was significantly cheaper. The numbers are correct-ish, but it depends on a number of factors. So it's not just, the cost of the solar panels, there's the cost of all of the equipment that are involved, there's the cost of capital, there's the cost of the kind of funding that is available, there is the tenure of the project. So it's very difficult to give a fixed number. Even the size of the project changes the dynamic. So it's very difficult to give a fixed number for the cost of electricity, but that range is possible. So 85 naira is very optimistic, but it can, in most cases, if you find a solution that costs 85 naira per kilowatt hour, there are a lot of other things that will happen in the course of that project that will make up for the cost.
So we shouldn't get too carried away.
If you understand that.
Yeah, we shouldn't get too carried away. I'm coming to you now, Dr. Patrick, with what's going around. How does, and welcome to the show, how does the price of grid-generated power, how does it compare to that of solar?
Yeah, so I think grid-generated power, it's technically should be cheaper than solar, but also there's a lot of challenges that the grid faces. So currently, with the new regulation that's coming into place, we should technically achieve close to 209 naira for a 24-hour power or over 22-hour power for electricity. And obviously, solar is obviously meant to be similar or cheaper. So I think what we're seeing really is to get a brief background on why we're actually seeing a cheaper price for a PPA or electricity rate from solar. And this is really thanks to some of the reforms that are being made in Nigeria. Talks about like FX stability, talking about the removal of fuel subsidy. And we've seen a huge increase of solar adoption in Nigeria. And that economy of scale allows for the power to be much cheaper. So it's not without a stretch. But like my colleague said there, 85 naira per kilowatt hour is very optimistic. I don't think we're at 85 naira per kilowatt hour yet, but solar is still considerably cheaper than the grid.
All right, and I'm coming back to you. When it comes to the cost advantage, and how does that extend beyond just the initial pricing? How does that work out? And I believe you have more to say about the pricing. And I think I'll add there accessibility. Who has access and who can afford it? Yeah,
I think what's the most important thing with solar is it brings some sense of stability to predicting how we power our systems. We always know the sunlight is going to come every day. We're not yet sure if the grid is going to be on every day, right? So that's one sense of stability in terms of we understand that power would come from the sun. But also converting that power to being usable at homes and businesses is also very interesting. There's a lot of new technology that's come into place that has made solar a little bit much more reliable than what we would typically have in the last couple of years. So within the changes of technology and obviously the predictability of the sunlight, there's a lot more stability that we can get from solar.
Mm-hmm. And I'm coming now to you, Ayo, right? And citing data in 2010, the IEA estimated that there would be 410 gigawatts of solar panels installed around the world. We're now seeing, that's by 2035, by the way, but right now we're seeing it already at 4 times that capacity. How do you assess the widespread adoption globally and even here in Nigeria? What are some of the key drivers for adoption locally and internationally?
Internationally, I would say that there are a lot more policies and reforms that help with adoption, in the sense that one of the easiest ones is net metering or grid feeding tariffs. What that means essentially is I can decide that I'm going to install a lot more solar than I need in my facility or in my home. But I'm sure that I'm not wasting that electricity because the national grid provider is going to pay me back for any excess electricity that I can produce and feed into the grid to close up any electricity gaps that may occur. In that kind of situation, you have people who only need, let's use numbers, say just about 10 kilowatts of solar in their house, but they would fill up the entire roof space and install up to 100, knowing that they can sell that extra electricity to the grid and receive some rebate for it. Now that is on the international scale. We don't have practical implementation of net metering and grid feedings in Nigeria yet. I'm emphasizing the yet because last year we did a review of net metering methodology that NERC is trying to implement in Nigeria. So this is something that can happen soon for Nigeria. So those kind of policies will really help with the implementation of solar across board, both in Nigeria and internationally. Another thing is speaking to accessibility. So the major issue with solar adoption is cost. Before now, you needed to have a bulk sum of capital available for implementation because you had to pay all at once. But there are quite a number of financing products that are available now for solar solution adoption, where you just pay a small amount in the beginning to implement the project, and then the rest of it you can pay over a tenure. More than likely, there's an interest applied to it, but it's within what you can afford. So, and then what happens is that, say you pay off your loan, or you're paying off over 5 years. You're still using the system for another 25 years. So it's a long-term benefit to having solar installed at your facility.
All right, so payment plans that pretty much drive accessibility. After this break, we'll dive deeper into, especially as regards production and importation and the regulation around it here in Nigeria. Stay tuned. You're still watching Business Edge. Solar versus grid, that's the conversation we're having here, specifically around the pricing. We do have Dr. Patrick, founder and CEO of PAM Africa, with us, and Ayomide Agbola, the country manager of Western Solar. And I'll begin with you, Dr. Patrick. I'll come back to you. Should it even be a zero-sum conversation when it comes to solar? Should it be solar versus grid? Is there a world in which one eliminates the other, or are they complementary, especially here in Nigeria?
Now, Nigeria specifically, I would say it's not solar, it's not grid. It's actually a combination of both solar and the grid together. That's what we need to achieve. Solar has its perks. It's easily distributable, that you can have it in different locations and get the power that is generated very close to where it's being used. But also the grid has its opportunities as well. There's the economy of scales there. There's more people connected to the grid. There's more people sharing that power generation that's coming from the grid. And it could potentially with more reliability, could be cheaper in the long run. So there's a benefit on both supply points. And I think Nigerians should encourage both, support both, and really dive into the intricacies of what it means and what it benefits for each users. Commercial users who are probably in the middle of nowhere, in off-grid locations, could potentially benefit more from solar power. But when we're looking at dense, compact areas with less roof space, less land available, the grid supply is always a better alternative.
Interesting. And staying with you, Doctor, we know that Nigeria is currently the second largest importer of solar energy in Africa. Talk us through that, especially vis-a-vis the scope of local manufacturing. Yeah,
so we were 2 years ago. As of last year, we're the second largest importer of solar, roughly about 1.7 gigawatts, which is probably about 1,700 megawatts of solar panels coming into the country. This is really impressive, and I think Nigeria should keep up that trend and shows some energy independence that we're going through. But also, we can't rely just on imports. We need to find a way to manufacture these solar panels locally. And I know there's a couple of key players, two that I know of head, that are actually spearheading this activity at the moment, doing some local assembly. But later on, we'll probably see more players come into the space, driving more local manufacturing.
And I'm coming to you now, what does this, all that we've said so far, the developments, the comparison, the complementary nature of things, what does this mean for the power sector in Nigeria, especially in terms of investments, considering the recent reforms? So taking a look at Nigeria's business policies and the enticement for foreign investors.
That's interesting. During sometime in the last few years, there's been a fight, so to speak, between grid providers and solar or renewable energy providers, where they're being pit against each other, which I think is very short-sighted. There was a grid situation just last night where everybody lost power. I think there's an opportunity for major integration, major synergy between the grid, the national grid, or the conventional forms of power and renewable energy sources to close the gap and provide power significantly where the grid falls short. I have to commend REA and a lot of the other agencies for the work that they're doing in this line, to fit solar into where we have gaps in the national grid. The only thing is that adoption of solar on that scale requires significant financial investments that are not readily available, in the sense that the money is there, but the ease of making those financial investments in the companies that will do the work or in the infrastructure that is required for such large-scale projects. To put it simply, there's a lot left to be done to make it more interesting for investors, for international investors. I'll give you an example. There are investors that are willing to provide international funding that's hedged against the naira, but it's more enticing for them if that hedging is provided by a national bank. And we struggled to get that kind of hedging available. Just to the financial people who are listening will understand where I'm coming from. If I can hedge my foreign loan against naira that's backed by a national bank, I'm home free essentially. So we need to think about the kind of investment products that make it enticing for DFIs to bring in their funds and to pour it into the national grid without having any issues or without being worried that the investment is going to waste.
Yeah, so hopefully that's something that is addressed in time. And I'm coming finally to you, Doctor. I once heard a player within the sector suggest that it would be better if individuals go off-grid, so that whatever is left available is left for the industry. So do you agree with that?
It depends. Off-grid, going off-grid requires a lot of investment, right? These are generation assets which are typically invested by large financial institutions, and they actually require a lot of upfront capital. That upfront capital is something that we don't have in abundance in Nigeria right now, right? So going off-grid is great, but it needs to be supported by subsidy. It needs to be supported by the need for that. It would be ideal if we can go off grid, or some customers can go off grid. It would really release the pressure that the DisCos are currently facing right now, and they can serve the customers that are priority to them in a better way, right? So the grid has a very strong need, but I don't think that everyone going off grid, it would be an ideal situation. I feel there's like I said, a synergy and a match between the activities from what the grid is providing to the country and also what solar energy can do. I think there's a mix. You need the energy mix. You can't just rely on grid solar.
Indeed. We'll continue to have, and we know that there's still more to explore here, but we are pressed for time. Thank you so much for your perspectives on the show today. Dr. Patrick Agese, the founder and CEO of PAM Africa, as well as Ayomide Agbola, the country manager at Wester Solar. Do appreciate.